What if I told you that over 100 years ago, a small island nation rose up against one of the world's largest empires, and won? Not with size, but with strategy. Not with power, but with purpose. This is the story of how Japan shocked the world, changed the course of history, and proved that the future wouldn't always belong to the biggest voice, but to the one most prepared to be heard. The Russo-Japanese War was born from a deep rivalry between two empires, Russia and Japan, both seeking influence in East Asia, at the turn of the 20th century. As Japan rapidly modernized after the Meiji Restoration, it grew into a confident and ambitious power. Meanwhile, Russia, an already massive empire stretching from Europe to the Pacific, sought warm water ports and expansion into regions that Japan also eyed. The most contentious areas were the Korean Peninsula and Manchuria, particularly Port Arthur, which held immense strategic and naval value due to its location on the Yellow Sea and its ability to remain ice-free year-round. Russia had leased Port Arthur from China and was building a strong naval presence there, while simultaneously expanding the Trans-Siberian Railway to solidify control over its Far Eastern territories. Japan viewed this as a direct threat to its own regional interests and security. Korea, seen by Japan as its lifeline, became a center of conflict as both powers wanted to dominate it economically and politically. Diplomatic efforts failed, as both nations remained firm in their ambitions. Russia underestimated Japan's military capabilities and its willingness to go to war, while Japan feared being surrounded and eventually colonized if it didn't act. This competition wasn't just territorial, it was also ideological. Japan sought recognition as a modern equal power among Western empires, and defeating Russia was seen as a way to earn that respect. Russia, on the other hand, wanted to maintain its status as a great power and did not expect serious resistance from an Asian nation. These conflicting goals, combined with military buildups and failed diplomacy, led to rising tensions that would soon explode into war. Imperial rivalry turned regional ambition into global shock when war finally broke out in 1904, rewriting assumptions about power and race in the modern world. On the night of February 8, 1904, without a formal declaration of war, Japan launched a surprise naval attack against the Russian fleet anchored at Port Arthur. This bold move marked the beginning of the Russo-Japanese War. Japan had learned from past Western tactics and understood the advantage of striking first, especially before Russia could complete its military preparations in the Far East. The attack was not random. It was carefully planned and timed to disable the Russian fleet before it could be used effectively against Japanese forces. Torpedo boats approached the harbor under cover of darkness and launched a series of strikes aimed at Russian battleships. Though the initial damage was limited, and the Russian fleet was not entirely destroyed, the attack dealt a psychological blow. It stunned the Russian command and boosted the morale of the Japanese public and military. The assault also showed Japan's commitment to modern warfare, where speed, planning, and technology played a crucial role. By taking the initiative, Japan demonstrated that it was not merely reacting to events but was shaping them with intent and strategy. The attack on Port Arthur also disrupted Russia's plans to dominate the region. The Russian fleet was meant to serve as a deterrent and a tool of projection, but Japan's strike reduced its effectiveness from the outset. In the following weeks, Japanese forces moved quickly to blockade Port Arthur and launched further land operations in Korea and Manchuria. The surprise nature of the attack helped Japan gain the upper hand early in the conflict, and it set the tone for a war that would challenge long-standing assumptions about Asian and European military strength. The world took notice, and Japan's actions were seen as a sign that the global balance of power was beginning to shift. The Russo-Japanese War was one of the first major conflicts of the 20th century to fully incorporate the tools of modern warfare. Both Japan and Russia relied on newly industrialized military technologies, such as modern steel battleships, rapid-firing artillery, machine guns, and railways for troop and supply movement. This war was not fought with swords or horses alone. It was fought with telegraphs, steam engines, and industrial power. The Japanese military had rapidly modernized after studying European models, particularly those of Britain and Germany. and was now using those lessons in a real war against a European empire. Naval power played a critical role throughout the Euro conflict. Japan's fleet was modern, fast, and well-trained. Russian ships were larger but outdated and poorly coordinated. Control of the seas allowed Japan to land forces in Korea and Manchuria with great speed. Railroads, especially the Russian-built Trans-Siberian Railway, were key to logistics. However, it was still incomplete and single-tracked in places, which slowed Russian reinforcements. Meanwhile, Japan's ability to move troops and supplies efficiently helped it maintain momentum in battle. The war also marked one of the first times the media played a significant role in shaping public opinion through photography, newspapers, and telegraph communications that spread updates rapidly across the world. This helped the global audience witness events almost in real time. Additionally, trench warfare began to appear on land, with brutal and prolonged sieges like the one at Port Arthur resembling what would later be seen in World War I. Japan's use of coordinated land and sea operations showed a modern understanding of total war strategy, where political, technological, and military elements all came together. This blend of industrial age tactics with traditional imperial ambition made the conflict a model for wars that would follow, reshaping how nations prepared for and fought future battles. The Battle of Tsushima, fought in May 1905, was the most decisive and dramatic naval engagement of the Russo-Japanese War. After months of slow progress and mounting losses, Russia sent its Baltic Fleet, renamed the Second Pacific Squadron, on an 18,000-mile journey around Africa to reinforce its forces in the Far East. The voyage took several months, and by the time the exhausted and poorly maintained fleet reached the waters near Japan, morale was low and resources were strained. The Japanese Navy, led by Admiral Togo Heihachiro, had been preparing for this moment, studying the Russians' route and conserving their strength for a single, crushing blow. On May 27, 1905, near the Tsushima Strait between Korea and Japan, the two fleets clashed. The Japanese Navy had superior tactics, faster ships, better gunnery, and a stronger understanding of modern naval combat. Admiral Togo executed a risky but brilliant maneuver known as crossing the T, which allowed his ships to fire full broadsides at the Russian fleet while the Russians could only respond with forward guns. The result was devastating. In less than 2 days, the Russian fleet was virtually annihilated. More than 30 ships were sunk or captured, and over 5,000 Russian sailors were killed or taken prisoner. In contrast, Japan lost only a few hundred men and no major ships. The battle was a shock to the world. It marked the first time in modern history that an Asian power had completely defeated a European empire in a major military confrontation. Naval experts and political leaders across the globe re-evaluated their strategies and assumptions. Japan's victory at Tsushima didn't just end the naval threat. It shattered Russia's hopes of recovering the war and forced it to seek peace. It confirmed Japan's status as a major world power and changed naval warfare forever. After the crushing defeat at the Battle of Tsushima, Russia faced rising domestic unrest, military exhaustion, and international pressure, all of which pushed it toward ending the war. Japan, though victorious, was also stretched thin economically and militarily. Both sides realized that prolonging the conflict would come at too high a cost. In this context, U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt offered to mediate peace talks, seeing an opportunity to stabilize the region and enhance American influence in international diplomacy. The negotiations were held in Portsmouth, New Hampshire in the summer of 1905, leading to the Treaty of Portsmouth. Japan entered the negotiations expecting significant territorial gains and war reparations. It demanded full control of Korea and the southern portion of the Russian-leased Liaodong Peninsula, including Port Arthur, as well as the southern half of Sakhalin Island. Russia, unwilling to admit defeat, resisted these demands but was in no position to continue fighting. In the end, Japan secured recognition of its control over Korea and gained the lease to Port Arthur and the South Manchurian Railway. It also received the southern half of Sakhalin Island, but had to drop its demand for financial compensation. The treaty marked a diplomatic victory for Japan, solidifying its status as the dominant power in East Asia. However, the Japanese public was disappointed by the absence of war reparations, leading to riots in Tokyo. On the other hand, Russia's imperial pride was deeply wounded, and the war's outcome contributed to growing dissatisfaction with the Tsarist regime, fueling the 1905 Russian Revolution. Roosevelt received the Nobel Peace Prize for his role in mediating the treaty, making him the first American to win the award. The Treaty of Portsmouth formally ended the war, but left lasting tensions in the region and reshaped the balance of power in the Pacific. The global impact of the Russo-Japanese War went far beyond the immediate battlefield. Japan's victory marked the first time in modern history that an Asian nation defeated a European imperial power in a full-scale war. This outcome shocked governments and citizens around the world. For the West, it shattered long-standing beliefs in European military superiority and racial hierarchies. For many in Asia and Africa living under colonial rule, Japan's triumph became a powerful symbol of resistance and hope. It inspired anti-colonial movements as people began to believe that imperial dominance could be challenged and even overturned. In Europe, the war forced military planners to reassess their strategies, technologies, and diplomatic priorities. Observers studied the conflict carefully, noting the use of trenches, barbed wire, machine guns, naval blockades, and long-distance logistics. These methods foreshadowed the large-scale warfare seen a decade later in World War I. The shock of the Russian defeat also exposed the internal weaknesses of the Russian Empire, helping to ignite the 1905 Russian Revolution. The Tsar's inability to secure victory abroad undermined public confidence and intensified calls for political reform and change. For Japan, the war elevated its status to that of a recognized great power. Its modern military, industrial capability, and diplomatic leverage earned it a permanent place in future international negotiations. Yet this success also fueled national pride and a sense of destiny that would later grow into imperial ambition, leading Japan to expand aggressively in Asia in the decades to follow. The war thus reshaped the political landscape of East Asia and contributed to the rise of nationalist movements in colonized regions. The consequences of the conflict echoed far beyond 1905, influencing both the decline of old empires and the rise of new powers in a rapidly changing world order. And so, the story of the Russo-Japanese War is more than just a tale of battles and treaties. It's a story of change, courage, and consequences. It showed the world that power does not always lie with the largest empire, and that determination, preparation, and belief can shift the course of history. For Japan, it was a step onto the global stage. For Russia, it was a moment of reckoning. For the rest of the world, it was a signal that the old rules were beginning to fade, and new voices were rising. When we look back on this war, we're not just learning about what happened, we're learning why it still matters.